an edge-to-edge pattern and then stitching it and realigning it. So we're going to push enter here. It will open the PantoVision, and we will see the screen of the quilt top here. Now this is just the size of whatever you did last time. That comes up as the default. So I'm going to select File and then New Project, and I'm going to enter in the size of the quilt I'm going to do right now. And right now my quilt is 45 inches wide and 60 inches long. I say accept, and you'll see the size of that grid has changed. Now my needle, as it moves around, right now I have my needle on the upper right corner of my quilt, but you can see here on the screen it is not shown on the upper right corner of the screen. It's shown here in the middle. So I need to fix that by selecting Home. When I click Home, it will move the quilt top and the plus that represents the needle so that they correspond with where they really are. So now this is correct, and I'm going to build this quilt. I'm going to use this edge-to-edge design. When I select this pattern, I want to place it where I want it to be, and it starts on the right and goes to the left, and I like to stitch that way also. I'm going to bring it all the way over to the right side of my quilt. Now there's one thing I want to pay attention to, and that is the size of this pattern. The width is 8.7 and the height is 8.48. So it's about 8.5 inches tall. Now I'm on an 18-inch machine, so if it's a little bit bigger, that will be no problem whatsoever. Actually, if it's about 10 inches, that would be great. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I build this quilt. The pattern is selected, and I am going to create more repeats. I'm going to leave it the size that it is for now, but in a minute I may resize it in a different way, and I just want to keep in mind that if I resize it up to about 8 inches, that would work out well. 10 inches, sorry. So there's one row, and it actually filled this row very nicely. So 8.5 goes into 40 apparently, and it went well. I'm going to do one more repeat. It comes in attached to my machine, the needle head. The head of the machine, the needle. I am going to drop it with this claw. You can pick it up that way too if you like. And then I'm going to reposition it using these arrows. I do the major reposition with my mouse or my sew head, and then I do the little adjustments using these arrows. Now I'm happy with that. It might be easier if I zoom in a little closer. I can use these scroll bars to put the quilt where I zoom in. It'll zoom in on the middle of the screen, so if the quilt is way over to the right, you're not going to zoom in on the right area. So there we go. I'm going to group these together now. So I select one pattern, I use the group icon, I select the other pattern. They are now one group. I say accept. Now that one group, I'm going to click again, which selects it, and I'm going to make a copy, which is this icon here. Now I had 2 rows, now I have 4 rows. You can see it comes in attached to the machine again. Sometimes if you just pull it off the side, it makes it easier to select. I am moving it with my finger or my mouse or my stylus, whatever you like to use best, that's what you should use. I get it close to where it should be, and then I scoot it to where I really want it with the little arrows. I'm happy with that. I'm going to make one more row. So this one is highlighted. It will make another copy of it. It will come in attached to my needle. And I will continue with this process until I have nearly filled the quilt top. I need to move that up a little bit. So I'm going to zoom out a little so I can see more of the quilt. Just use my scroll bars to zoom around. One more row is going to fill this nicely, I think. One more copy. It comes in again, attached to my quilt needle. Bring it down here. Be patient. There's a little lag as you move things around. It feels a little bit jerky as I grab it and move it. If you're impatient, you'll think that you're not moving it, and then you are, and then it isn't where you want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Now, it just so happens that these numbers that I've chosen with this pattern filled this quilt very nicely. And in reality, I would not change the size of these patterns because it worked out well. But I'm going to show you how I would change it. Down here, maybe if the quilt size was 5 inches more, I'm going to make this pattern 5 inches longer. We're going to pretend that the quilt is 5 inches longer, and this is how I would fix that. Now what I'm going to do is resize all the patterns together, and I can do that if I group them together. So even though this is already a group, it's a group of 2 rows, I am going to turn it into a group of 4 groups. So that one, and that one, and that one, and that one are now all grouped together as one pattern. So I'm going to say accept, and once I've done that, I'm going to resize the entire group. So I must select it. It has to be dark green. This is my resize icon. I click that. It opens up this window over here. I'm going to do it with the mouse or my finger or stylus, whatever you're using. And I put a click where I want this to start, the top left corner of the pattern, and then I bring down the bottom right corner of the pattern. Now, I would probably take off maintain ratio and pull this pattern out until it nicely covers all the edges of my quilt. Now remember, I said I'm going to pretend that this quilt is 5 inches longer just so that I can show you this exercise. It fit nicely without doing this resize with my dimensions. So I wanted to make sure that you understood how you can change the size of the entire quilt pattern. Now if I wanted to change, move this a little bit, I could right click on one of these gray squares, and to right click with your finger, I believe you just hold it there, and I can stretch it out just that way if my quilt was a little wider and I wanted to take it that way. Okay, so when I like the way that looks, here I can change the size. So basically I can change the size of this as long as you have maintain ratio off. You can pull that out in any direction. I say accept, and now this pattern is created and I can sew it. Now I am going to ungroup all of these patterns now, and the reason I'm going to do that is so that I can select them one by one and sew them. So this is my ungroup button, and it ungroups, and then I can ungroup each row by selecting it and then touching ungroup. So I would do that so that each one of my rows now is separate and I'm ready to sew it. So once that's done and I'm ready to sew this, it might be a good idea to do a file save so that you can open this up next time. File, save, whoop, save pattern, save project. That's what I'm going to do. Going to open up my screen. I call each one new, so I am overwriting what was there last time, and that's okay because I'm finished with that quilt. My customer took it, it's gone, and I'm not going to open it again. If you think that you need to open it again, you might want to give it a different name. Very quickly I learned that if I saved every single quilt I ever worked on, I was going to have 3,000 quilts that I was going to have to dig through my files and find, and I don't want to have to do that, so I just overwrite them each time. And now this is ready to stitch. So I'm going to move close to the starting point. I'm going to select that pattern. If you don't select the pattern when you do running view, you will see nothing. If it's selected, it will show. So now I'm on running view. This is the pattern, and I am going to stitch this pattern. So I just turn my machine on, start stitching away. You can see it jumps, everything gets easy with practice. And at first it feels very, very strange to try to follow that as if it's a video game. You're just moving the X around to follow the pattern. So I'm going to finish this row, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to realign to do the next row. All right, I have finished row number 1, and I need to advance so that I can stitch row number 2. But my machine only comes to here, so I can't possibly stitch this row unless something changes, and that's the reposition button. I need to reposition this quilt orientation with the needle. So what I'm going to do is open the realignment button. Now I want to explain a little bit of what I'm doing. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You want to realign, you're going to have to pick a point on the quilt that you've stitched that's done. So I can look at the quilt and see the pattern. And I'm looking at my quilt, and I see this flower pattern, and I see the tip of this flower, and I can put my needle directly over it. Now if I look on the screen, it shows my needle directly over it, and if I look down on the quilt, it shows directly over it. So the two coincide. That's great. But I'm going to roll my machine forward now. Now watch what I do. I'm going to put my needle down in the tip. So I'm right in the tip of the real flower, put my needle down. Now I'm going to roll my quilt up onto the take-up roller, and you're going to see the needle has moved, the pattern has moved in real life, the quilt, the part that has been stitched. My needle is in the tip of that flower, but on the screen, that's not what you see. So I need to change what I see on the screen so that I'm ready to do my second row. So what's going to happen is I do reposition. Now it says, use the mouse to select the point on the screen or pattern to use as a reference point. Now I already decided what that point was going to be, and it is the tip of this flower right here. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can touch it a little bit better with my finger or my mouse, and when I do, it will put a little green dot there. There's my little green dot. I hope you can see it on the video. That is where my needle is, and my instructions over here say move the sew head to select the point on the quilt to realign to. Well, I've already got my needle down in that point. So I don't need to change anything. I'm going to say full view so you can see what's happening here. So green dot is here, my needle is up here, and when I say align, those 2 points become one. And now what I see in front of me, the real quilt, represents the virtual quilt on the screen, and I am ready to do row 2. So I need to say accept. If I'm not happy with the result I got, I would at this point say reset and do the process again. I say accept, and now I need to select the row I want to sew. If I don't select it, I won't see it. I'm going to take my needle out, come over here to the beginning, say running view, voila, there is my pattern, and I'm ready to stitch my second row. I hope this helps you stitch edge-to-edge patterns with your PantoVision. The realign button makes it really easy to get each row spaced nicely and all the rows fit well on the quilt if you've designed it right.